I didn't plan to say it. In fact, I almost kept quiet. But one simple sentence slipped out of my mouth, and the look on his face made me realize something I hadn't understood about people, or myself, for a very long time. And strangely, that moment changed both of us. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about the day, just another routine start. I stopped by the same coffee shop I'd been going to for months before work. Small place on the corner, not fancy, but quiet enough that people actually looked up from their phones sometimes. I usually sat by the window with my laptop, not really working most of the time, just easing into the day. By then, I knew the regulars. The guy who read newspapers like it was still 1998, the woman who always ordered tea but never drank more than half, and then there was him. His name was Daniel. I only knew that because the barista called it out every morning. Large black coffee for Daniel. Every single day. Same order, same time, same routine. But something about him always stood out to me. Not because he talked a lot. Actually, the opposite. He barely spoke to anyone. He'd walk in, nod politely, grab his coffee, and sit at the far corner table. Always the same seat, always alone. At first, I didn't think much about it. People keep to themselves, that's normal. But after a few weeks, I started noticing small things, little details. He never checked his phone. He never opened the laptop. He never read anything. He just sat there, quietly staring at the coffee cup in front of them. Sometimes for 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. It wasn't sad exactly, just strange, like he was somewhere else entirely. Months passed like that. We were strangers who shared the same room every morning. Sometimes our eyes met for a second, the polite kind of eye contact people make before quickly looking away. Nothing more. But one morning, something changed. Daniel walked in later than usual. The shop was crowded that day. A long line at the counter, people standing around with laptops, the low buzz of conversation filling the room. When he got his coffee, his usual table was taken. He hesitated for a moment, scanning the room. Then his eyes landed on the empty chair across from me. He walked over slowly. "Do you mind if I sit here?" he asked. His voice was quieter than I expected. "Not at all," I said. He nodded and sat down. For the first few minutes, we did what strangers do, pretended the other person wasn't there. I typed on my laptop. He stared at his coffee. But sitting that close, I noticed something I hadn't before. He looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, the kind that sits behind someone's eyes. Eventually, he let out a small sigh. Not dramatic, just tired. I glanced up without thinking. "You okay?" I asked. He gave a quick, polite smile. "Yeah," he said automatically. "Just a long week." Something about the way he said that made me pause. It sounded like a sentence he'd repeated 1,000 times, like the answer came before the question. I nodded and went back to my laptop. But a minute later, I heard him quietly laugh to himself. Not a happy laugh, more like disbelief. You ever feel like you've been running for years and you're not even sure where you were trying to go? It caught me off guard. We'd barely spoken. But there it was. A real question. I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I said, more times than I'd like to admit. He stared at his coffee again. "I worked 15 years at the same company. Last month they downsized. Position eliminated." He shrugged slightly. Just like that. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to give the usual responses. You know the ones. Everything happens for a reason, you'll find something better. People say those things because silence feels uncomfortable. But sometimes those words feel empty. So I just listened. Daniel continued. "At first I thought it would feel like freedom, but instead it feels like someone erased the map." He looked up at me for the first time. "I keep thinking," he continued quietly, "maybe I wasted all that time." That's when the sentence slipped out. I didn't plan it. I didn't analyze it. I just said it. "You didn't waste it." He looked up slightly. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair. I mean, people think time only matters if it leads somewhere obvious. A promotion, a milestone, some clear result. He was listening now. But most of the time, I continued, those years were shaping how you think, how you treat people, how you handle problems. I paused. Even if the job disappeared, the person you became didn't. He didn't say anything for a while. He just looked at me, not in a dramatic way, more like someone turning a thought around in their mind. Finally, he asked quietly, "You really believe that?" I nodded. I do, because it was true. I'd spent years assuming certain parts of my life were wasted too. Jobs that went nowhere, projects that failed. But later, I realized something uncomfortable. Those experiences had quietly shaped the decisions that mattered later. Without them, I wouldn't think the way I do. Daniel stared at the table for a long moment. Then something subtle changed in his expression. Not excitement, not relief, just space, like a window opened in a room that had been closed for a while. "You know," he said slowly, "no one said it like that. Most people," he explained, "try to fix the situation, give advice, push optimism, but that's not what he needed. He needed someone to look at the past differently, because if the past wasn't wasted, then maybe the future wasn't ruined either." We talked for another 20 minutes that morning, about careers, about how much of our identity gets tied to what we produce, about how uncomfortable it is when life interrupts that story. Eventually, he finished his coffee and stood up. "Thanks," he said, "for the conversation." I shrugged. "Anytime." Then he added something that stuck with me. "That sentence you said, it changed the way I was thinking about the last 15 years. I smiled slightly. "I'm glad." But I didn't realize how much it mattered until later. A few weeks passed. Life got busy. I stopped visiting the coffee shop as often. Then one morning I went back. Same place, same window seat. I was halfway through my coffee when someone approached the table. "Mind if I sit here again?" It was Daniel, but he looked different. Not completely different, just lighter somehow. "Of course," I said. He sat down and smiled. "I started consulting for a small company. Nothing huge, but interesting work." "That's great," I replied. He nodded. "I almost didn't take the meeting," he admitted. Part of me kept thinking, what's the point? Then he looked at me. "But I remembered what you said. You were becoming someone." He tapped the table lightly. "So I figured maybe that someone still has something useful to offer." We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence, and that's when something quietly clicked for me. Most people think life-changing moments are dramatic, big speeches, major events, but often they're just small sentences said at the right time. Words that shift how someone sees their own story. And once the story changes, everything else starts to move differently too. Now, whenever I think back to that morning, I realize something simple but powerful. People aren't always looking for answers. Sometimes they're just looking for a new way to look at the question, a different perspective on the years they thought were wasted, the mistakes they regret, the chapters they wish had gone differently. Because maybe those chapters weren't failures at all. Maybe they were just unfinished parts of the story. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence to help someone see that.